Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and I'm joined once again by Steven Torres.
Hello, Rory. Thanks for having me once again.
It's great to have you back on, Steven. Very good to see you again, my friend. And I'm also joined this time by former midfielder Alex Popovich. Alex, how are you doing? Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this as well. This is really in the spirit of the episodes that we've been doing with Steven this year, where we uncover some of the really fascinating, untold, and often misrepresented stories, I think I would say, from US soccer and CONCACAF in general. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We are going to be talking about one of, if not the very first representative team from the United States to compete at a CONCACAF tournament in Guatemala in 1964. I believe it was an under-19s tournament, but it was a tournament that Alex himself actually attended and played in, which is going to be amazing being able to hear about the stories and the experience that you actually had of being at an international camp at that level. It's going to be a really interesting chat. It's not often that we get to speak with footballers. And Alex also has an upcoming reunion with some of the other players who were at that camp as well. As you said off air, you're really looking forward to talking about this. And I'm looking forward to hearing the stories as well. Steven, you've been on quite a few times this year. If you could give the briefest of introductions to our listeners who might not know who you are just yet, we'll kick things off there.
No worries. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Okay. I am a sports media relations operations consultant. I am a former FIFA media officer. I've worked 2 World Cups, 2 Olympic Games, and 2 Club World Cups. And as most people already know from our previous podcast, I am the president of the Association of North Central American and Caribbean Football Investigators, who are also a proud partnership with Football Heritage. So thanks for once again having me on this podcast, and of course, giving Alex Popovich the opportunity to be on this as well.
Yeah, and thanks very much for helping us to organise this episode as well. It's been a fantastic partnership that we've had so far, and really appreciative for all the work that you've helped us do over the last 7-8 months or so. Alex, your turn. Tell myself and our listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I was part of the first U.S., we called it at that time, U.S. junior national team, which has now evolved into the U17s, U19s, U20s, etc. Over the years, I was fascinated by seeing all these U19 tournaments, and they're going to the World Cup, and they're going here, and they're going there. And so I started looking up under U.S. soccer, and there was nothing mentioned ever about the very first team that competed, ever. And, I kept looking, and finally, after a bunch of years, I found an article that Eric Lago wrote along with somebody else, and he left his email on there. And so I contacted him and I said, you mentioned in the article there's a tournament in Guatemala, but there's no information about U.S. And I said, no information? Let me tell you what I've got. So I sent him a bunch of pictures. I sent him our diplomas that we got, pictures of the team, names of players. And I said, my goal and objective is to have this recorded in the U.S. soccer archives, so that if somebody who's a player now or just looking up knows where all this started. There was some beginning somewhere. There was some guy who did this first. And, we were the first.
Yeah, exactly. You guys were the first. So tell us, Alex, did you have like a club career or a soccer career before this call-up came? Or was it a case that you actually went to, kind of test matches or tryouts or something like that before getting called up?
So, I was 17. This was in April of 64, regional tryouts. And I got a phone call after 2 tryouts that, I was selected. First time I got on an airplane at the old TWA in LaGuardia. We met together in St. Louis. And the coach, Bob Gilker, who was then the coach of St. Louis University at that time, in those years, that era, was the powerhouse in U.S. soccer. College soccer back then, there were maybe 30 teams around the whole country. Never mind, in one conference somewhere. Schools like Clemson, they never even knew what soccer was. It was football, American football. So here was our coach. We got together, and for a week and a half, he basically looked at who he had there and how he was going to deploy, who's going to play where and whatnot. I think we played 2 practice matches against Cutis, I guess, and some other junior team. And off we went and flew to Guatemala.
So alongside the players like yourself and some of your colleagues that you've just mentioned. Who else actually went with you? What was the kind of, give myself and our listeners a bit of context as to the type of equipment, the type of setup, and the sort of backroom staff, if you want to call it that, that came along with you, because I think this will actually be quite shocking for a lot of people.
We had 2 uniforms. We had a red uniform and a white one. One sweatsuit, and it was kind of like really kind of kinky, ugly sweatsuit. And that was it. We had our own football boots. I don't know how many. I don't know if we didn't have no trainer, no medical, no. It was like Bob Gelker, and I think the president of USSF came down to take pictures at the opening ceremonies and everything. And that was it. That was us, not nobody else.
That's honestly so crazy. I mean, that, to me, obviously the point of our conversation today is to, I suppose, raise a bit of awareness of the fact that this has become one of, at least soccer in the US's forgotten stories, which is a real shame, and we'll touch on that towards the end. But I suppose that, this is kind of pointing to a kind of idea that this wasn't really covered at the time. I mean, was this a big deal back home in the US when you guys were actually, going out to Guatemala and playing there?
Yeah, I actually have a translation from a bunch of guys that we've been in touch with, Wally Werner in particular. We have a bunch of articles. There was a writer in St. Louis called Dent McSkimming, who was the preeminent soccer writer in St. Louis. He kept writing articles every day. And, he talks about the first team going out there, etc. And then presidents of the Federation, Harry Krause, wrote about, so happy to be here in your beautiful country. And we are honored to bring here for the first time this kind of a tournament, the best that we have after so many very small tests. And there are many, many other articles. And each guy has like I have a scrapbook, of pictures of articles from the German newspapers in New York, the Ukrainian newspapers. I'm Ukrainian. There's actually 2 of us. Roman Kuch was the assistant goalie from Chicago, and myself, 2 Ukrainian kids. But we had kids from St. Louis, from Milwaukee, Philadelphia, from Long Island, Pittsburgh, Chicago, Baltimore, Maryland, and San Francisco. Yeah, poor guy from San Francisco. The sad thing was he was my roommate, and he got sick like the very first day. And I don't think he played a minute. I mean, the guy was like, he saw more of a toilet than he saw of a soccer field. I mean, it was awful. I mean, I felt terrible for the guy,
It's so unfortunate. I mean, it's like you were saying, though, and, me and Stephen have mentioned on this show before that, and like you said, you try to do your own research, but how is it that this one tournament can get boiled down to one article that you can only find online that is accessible for people? And obviously that's what Stephen is trying to do through ANCCIF, is to piece these bits of history together, because it's incredibly important that we tell these stories. And things like this, even this podcast, you'd probably consider it as an oral history because it's recording these stories. To our listeners who aren't aware, this is what's important about archiving and preservation, is when you have stories like Alex's stories about this tournament, where you can't find any information on it, where it's in danger of being lost, and actually, in danger of perhaps even slipping out of living memory, like other stories that we've discovered and spoken about. Records like this, stories like this, are so important in keeping the memory of that alive. And this is what's really good about the records that Alex and some of his other colleagues have. But I mean, you've mentioned about some of the campaign. It sounds absolutely amazing. And I want to hear everything that you have to tell about the tournament properly. Before we do that, though, I would like to hear some historic context about the tournament and why it came about initially. And I suppose some of the kind of sporting and logistical background behind it.
Sure. Basically, of course, I know Alex has the more detailed of being there physically. I can only say what was written and what is already. And going back a little bit of a history, of course, this was actually a CONCACAF tournament. Just in case people don't know what CONCACAF is, just to give a little education, it's the Confederation of Central American Caribbean Football. But actually, this organization was formed in 1961. So that was 3 years before the actual tournament that Alex participated on. And the reason why it was formed, it was because it was formed by the Confederation of Central American and Caribbean that was formed in 1941 and merged with the North American Football Confederation in 1946 to form CONCACAF in 1961. Okay. Now, along with that, it was just a young confederation, so they just started to get tournaments up and running. So they only had like the CONCACAF First Club Tournament, which was the Champions Cup in '62.
Back then it was called North American, Central American, and Caribbean, NORCECA.
Yeah, because they abbreviated calling it NORCECA because it was North America, Central America, and Caribbean. But actually, it was still called CONCACAF. And that was the tournament that was called the NORCECA Championship in 1963. That was for the national teams. So it's what, let's say, the predecessor of the Gold Cup right now, because there were many tournaments held like that. Now, the tournament that first ever youth tournament under the banner of CONCACAF was in 1962, and that was in Panama. That was the first tournament, and that was won by Mexico. The funny thing about it that those were an under 19 competition, and they were played with two 40-minute halves. It wasn't the standard 2 45 minutes. It was 2 minutes.
It's interesting. It's quite common in CONCACAF nations for that to happen.
Yes. Now going into the tournament that we're speaking of was the second ever tournament, and that took place in Guatemala. It was at the Estadio Mateo Flores in the capital city of Guatemala City from April 2nd to the 16th in 1964. Ironically, the offices of the General Secretary were in Guatemala City, though that was basically because the president at the time, he was based in Mexico. And of course, just to get into just a little bit fixtures of the actual tournament in '64, I mean, it was the U.S. first participation. They were in Group 1 along with El Salvador, Jamaica, Nicaragua, and the host, Guatemala. The U.S. did open with 2 consecutive draws against Jamaica and Nicaragua before losing, obviously, to Guatemala, the host, 3-1, and then the eventual tournament winner, which was El Salvador. This was, like, say, a landmark because it was the first U.S. team heading down there. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how it was, especially for Alex to be the first in a competition of this magnitude, because this was like years before the tournament became a qualifier for the FIFA World Championships. I mean, the FIFA World Championships didn't begin until '79. So it was way before that. So this was pretty much their competition, their world competition at the time. So.
From our end as well, I suppose, European perspective and particularly British perspective, it's probably quite easy for us to slip into the mistake of, it's an official under-19s tournament. Surely the Federation had like an established national team and all this kind of a thing, but it wasn't really the case. And it's quite common for a lot of nations in CONCACAF for it to be a little bit fractured in that sense, particularly when we look back in history, but also given the kind of context, I suppose, of soccer in the US. We need to remember that in the US, much like you have college baseball, you also have college soccer. Many people who play soccer in the US, they might never leave a certain level. It's a little bit different than how we have soccer in Europe. Obviously the same in many ways, but a little bit different. So what was the level that you played soccer at in the US? Did you play amateur, or were you a member of a college team or then eventually a club?
I started playing in 1956 with the New York Ukrainians. They were part of the German American League, and they had boys teams. Then they had what they call Schiller or juvenile team, and then they had junior teams, and then they had the first team. And so I played in the boys teams, Schiller, and junior teams. And also I played in high school at Brooklyn Tech High School. One of my teammates, and who was younger than me, was Werner Roth. You may have heard of him. Werner was just a little guy when he came from Yugoslavia. I have pictures of us. I was quite a big kid when I was a sophomore, junior in high school. I was already 5'10". Werner, I think, was like 5'6" then. He was this little guy. One day, here he is, captain of the Cosmos. That's another whole story.
So what were some of those teams like that you actually played for before your call-up came? I know we kind of touched on it briefly at the start, but just in a bit more detail, what kind of teams, what kind of clubs did you play for before the call-up came?
Yeah, so that was my soccer beginnings. And then afterwards, obviously, and during those years up to 64, I was selected to a bunch of different all-star teams in the New York area. We played in Randall's Island. To go and play in Randall's Island was a big deal because they had grass. We played on fields, that were dirt fields in College Point, in New Farmers Oval, and the old Metropolitan Oval. This was like dirt. There was a field, matter of fact, underneath the Queensboro Bridge, which was really like ash, like stuff. They just put ash on the field and level it out. So you can imagine how dusty that was to play. So when you got to play at Randall's Island, it was like, wow, we're playing on grass, actual grass. It's terrific. Then I was fortunate also for 2 years to play in when they had the International Soccer League in Randall's Island, where they brought in teams from Europe and South America and everywhere. West Ham United, Bangu of Brazil, Panathinaikos, Dukla Prague, all these teams that the ISL had there. And they had, during those tournaments all summer, they had all-star teams, which were the ball boys. So they selected from the New York City area young players, and we were the ball boys during the regular games. But during the week, we practiced with world-class coaches, which was really unbelievable education. We got to be coached by Alf Sherwood, play and practice with guys like Bobby Moore and the whole West Ham team, I remember. So, for 2 years, that was like getting a PhD in soccer, and I remember, even besides Alf Sherwood, but like when we had Sepp Herberger from Germany, we'd practice and he'd have us play first, practice 3-on-3, 6-on-6. He says, boys, he says, when I blow the whistle, everybody stop. I said, okay. So we're playing, he blow the whistle, stop. And then he point to each guy and he said, what were you going to do? Where were you going? What were you thinking? Where are you going to do? Everybody must be thinking and looking where to do. And remember, nobody runs faster than the ball. Things like that, little kid, you're learning, you're absorbing all this stuff. And then, you go and you see practice with some of the, big pros. And it's fun. It's like, I remember showering in Randall's Island with the West Ham guys. And remember Robert Brown, he was the center back at the time. And he comes in and he goes, anybody pass the salp? I go, what? What did you say? Pass the salp. Salp? What's the salp? He goes, the salp. You got to wash yourself with salp.
The soap.
So I'm like, oh, okay.
Cultural education.
The soap. I got it. The salp. So that was really sort of the background, before going on this trip. And it was terrific. It was, we ended up in St. Louis meeting these guys. We didn't have that much, it wasn't like we had a camp for a month, I mean, this was like a week and a half or 2 weeks, I think it was, in St. Louis, and then off to Guatemala.
So what was it actually like getting to Guatemala? As you kind of said, you're a kid at this point, you're still very young, and all of a sudden you're playing an international tournament in Guatemala. So let's hear some of the stories and your experience.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, what was scary, the scary beginning is you're looking out the window in the airplane as you're landing, and I'm looking, I'm saying, wait, these are just mountains. Where's the airstrip? I mean, literally, the airstrip was this little thin thing on top of a mountain. You're looking left, right, and you're like, uh-oh, we're going down. We get to our hotel in the center of Guatemala City. And it was kind of cool, it was like people are coming up to you and kind of looking at you. You look different than everybody there. And I remember, the opening ceremonies. I mean, we walk into, this huge stadium, like 50, 60,000 people. It was very similar like to the Olympics where, each team walks in, and there's a big parade. And it was pretty cool. We walked in, we paraded in, lined up.
Yeah, it's a big deal. Like they've made it like an important big ceremony. Like that must have been so cool being so young and like participating in this tournament. Like it's a big like reception or a recibimiento, as they would say in Spanish as well, with some of the clubs down in Argentina and things like that. It must have been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that was one thing. That was pretty cool. And then we would practice at different locations. They would drive us to different locations. But then, like for the first game against Jamaica, and I was lucky to be on the starting lineup. You're in the locker room and then you come out from underneath this tunnel. And I'm telling you, to this day, you get goosebumps because, you walk up and you look and it's like all these people. I mean, you never played in front of that many people. I mean, if you had 200 people in New York City somewhere, that was big. And this was huge.
Was it at that point that it kind of sunk in that you were playing like an international tournament? Like it must have just hit you then and there.
Yeah. And then, of course, with my luck, in the second half, I remember looking backward. I started running forward, and all of a sudden, bang, I smack into another player. And I'm like, oh man, it's really hot here. Look at it, I'm all bloody. So me and Rudy Anthony Pierce, Rudolph Anthony Pierce, that was his name. He's running this way, I'm running that way. We collided, and I had a scar right over here. And they come out on the field, they wipe us down, and they put these little butterfly clips on there. And they say, you got to go to the hospital. We got to sew you up. So I said, oh, we're going to wait for the ambulance. He said, oh, no, 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 no. He got into the doctor's Jeep. They drove us through quickly to the hospital in his Jeep, two of us, And Rudy's going like, he said, man, where are we going, man? What is this going on? What's this on? So they sewed us up quickly. Boom. Got into the Jeep, back to the stadium. He didn't put me in, let me rest afterwards. So then I think I missed half of the next game and then played after that again. But that was pretty bizarre experience. But yeah, a lot of people. It was really cool to play in front of so many people. It was really, I kind of look around and go, wow.
I can imagine. I mean, it's a fast start to your international football career as well. Like it's incredible. I mean, obviously you were a midfielder, and at the time, like as you said, it's a huge experience. It's a huge learning experience as well. But like, who were some of the other guys that you came up against and played with? You must have had such a revolving door of talent from the other teams that were there just around you as well. So it would have been great to play with those guys too.
Well, from my own team, the guys that I remembered pretty well was Pat Migliori, who was from Long Island. He went on to play afterwards. That was the other thing. After the tournament, a bunch of us had gotten all kinds of college scholarships, offers from different schools, etc. Pat Migliori was from Long Island. He went on afterwards to Brown. And the other guys that I remembered pretty well was Wally Werner and Gary McBrady. They were both from St. Louis. Gary McBrady went on to play for Michigan State. Wally went on to St. Louis University. Gary scored the first goal. Yeah, he was kind of a center forward. All of the guys that I mentioned went on afterwards in their college careers to become All-Americans and so forth. But interesting enough, I haven't seen any of them for like 50, 60 years, I mean, I ran into Pat Migliori once, and then afterwards, he disappeared. When he graduated, he went into the Air Force, I believe. When I called Brown University to try to track him down, they had no history. And I said, well, if you find, let him know that I'm, looking for him. Yeah, so those are sort of the guys that stood out in my brain. I mean, O'Connell, the goalie, he was kind of an interesting guy. He was 17, and he was almost balding, I was like, what? Never saw that. But he was kind of a funny guy. Then we had one guy with glasses, Vince. Now I just saw a picture of him, and I asked him where his glasses were. He said, oh, I got contacts 40 years ago. It's going to be interesting to try to recognize these guys when I see them in 2 weeks.
Yeah, I should say at this point, I don't think we've actually mentioned it that much, if at all, on this show yet. But Alex is actually going to be having a reunion with some of his former teammates and people who were involved with the trip to Guatemala. At the time of recording, it's going to be in a couple of weeks. By the time the episode is out, the reunion will already have taken place. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Alex afterwards to see how that went. I think it's going to be, it's a brilliant event for memorial and reminiscing. So it'll be good that some of you guys can at least get into a room together. I mean, what about some of the players from the other national teams that were there as well? Because, obviously the people that you're playing with on a daily basis, you're going to know how good those guys are. But from the other teams, like Jamaica or El Salvador or whoever else, was there any players that really stuck out to you?
From Jamaica, there were a couple of players that went on to play in the NASL. From Guatemala, I think one or two players. Carlos Ruano, I think that was one of the guys. Vernon Bell, Delroy Scott. They had programs to move on. We came back, and it was back to anonymity. Anonymity for all these years, but like I said, a bunch of the players went on. Vince, I know, went on to a very good coaching career, I heard, in St. Louis. I look forward to hearing about that when I'm there. Gary and Wally, I told you already about, and Pat. But the other guys, I really don't know what they did or how they progressed. All this is going to come up in 2 weeks. Find out what they did.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is the thing, because the tournament must have obviously given you such a platform for your career. moving forward. And, although we've kind of said it wasn't really treated as much of a big deal by a lot of people within the US, like, it must have been a great thing to have on your CV. So after the tournament came, where did you go from there in terms of a footballer? Where did you play, and were you ever called up again?
Afterwards, in the summertime, I'd play in Canada, Ukrainian team in Canada, Toronto Ukrainians. And I got to play in a couple of nice all-star games, one of which was against all-star team from Portugal and the Azores. Scored 3 goals against them. And one of the players that was there was Simões, who played for Portugal in the World Cup. And he was very, very, very cool.
Good. It's impressive to score a hat-trick in a game from midfield.
Well, what they call midfield, I was what you'd call an inside right back then. Today would be a attacking midfielder, I guess.
Right, okay, I'm with you, I understand. So what kind of clubs did you play against in these All-Star games? Because obviously, there's a couple of eras that kind of come to mind to me. There's obviously the International Soccer League, where you had clubs like Dukla Prague competing, who actually won it. Then you also had that era where there was, kind of offshoot teams of English clubs and other European teams. So if you're in and around that scene at the time, Alex, you must have played against some pretty cool players and some really decent clubs as well.
Yeah, so, I played against Dundee of Scotland in an all-star game. I got recruited, actually, by Cardiff City and Seville. And my father said, no, you're not going to Europe. And I said, well, it's an opportunity. I'll try. And he goes, no. You break your leg and then you come back and do what? Wash dishes? You're going to go to school? You're not going to get a scholarship with a broken leg. So, he did not allow me to even try to pursue any kind of a career. But yeah, Alf Sherwood was the coach over in Cardiff City. He wanted me to come out. My father said no. And in Sevilla, there was a coach also I was playing in Hartford for an NASL and a PSL before that. Teams came and gone after like 2-3 weeks, you have a team and then, all of a sudden there's no team, and then there's a team and, and then there's no team. And then I had a very, very bad injury. It was weird because my father said, no, you're not going to go to Seville. And then he relented and he said, okay, you're finished school and this is your last opportunity. And the guy Seville said, yeah, willing to give you a shot to come out. I was practicing at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. They used to have, real good teams. My brother was All-American there. There's a bunch of other great players, Walter Schmudalocha. And after the practice, I'm walking off the field. And back then, you had cleats, like 6 cleats on your soccer shoes, like long cleats. And I remember I'm walking off the field and somebody called me and I turned around. And as I turned, my cleats got stuck in the grass. And I turned, my knee went, and I'm like, are you kidding? I'm looking at my leg. It's like half twisted almost.
Oh, that's so unfortunate. That's so horrible.
Right away off, I had surgery on my knee, and that was the end of soccer. 19, and so that was that. Back then you didn't have the expertise in training and warm downs, warm ups. These sleeves, not that they wear on the hamstrings, and I remember playing. When I played at Bridgeport, I'd get Charlie horses constantly on my backs of my hamstrings because we played on Long Island Sound. You'd run 2-3 times up and down the field, a little breeze would come by and pop, next time you ran, you popped something. So,
it can happen. It is nice to hear that, you did look to pursue football after the tournament and a lot of your peers and colleagues did the same, but it's just so unfortunate. Yeah. That happened and in such a way as well, given the context of it all. But that's football, unfortunately. Those are the breaks.
Yeah. And it's funny, like I was mentioning before, Werner Roth, So when the Cosmos were put together and they went through a number of squad changes, they had a bunch of Americans and others, and then really loaded up, with Pele and Beckenbauer and Neeskens and Carlos Alberto. Wally and Werner stuck through it all, and also Shep Bessick, who I know very well. We, that's another story with Shep, about for the 67 Pan Am games, we were in the final tryouts in Philadelphia, and I scored like 2 goals and everything's cool. And Shep is saying, yeah, we're on the team for sure, And then like 2 weeks later, playing against NYU, and the guy smashes it to my head.
That's such bad luck. Oh my God.
It's a nasty one.
I mean, my brother was on the field. He came running, he watched it. He came running out. He thought he was going to kill the guy. I'm all stitched up and everything. I had to pass up like 2 or 3 games, and then with the injuries, it was like you got to pass on next guys. That's the thing with sports. You get injured at the wrong time, and there's always 3, 4 people just waiting, and I mean, deservedly so. Good players. Everybody's. It's just got to be lucky sometimes to get selected for certain teams, and a lot of it back then was political. You didn't have the same kind of a structure as you have now with national team coaches and building up from one level to another. It was like, one year it was this guy was the coach, next year this guy was the coach, Giza Henny, and then Chijovic, and then this guy and that guy. It was not like anything until like I think in the 80s, which is, how many years later.
I just don't get, Alex, when you said earlier, how can a delegation or a team, times have changed and the kids have it a lot made. I mean, they go in with a trainer, doctor, masseuse, sometimes a sports psychologist, but along with the coaching staff and then a head of delegation, sometimes hopefully they bring a press officer to record everything. But for you to say that it was just the team and the coach and maybe just the head of delegation who was probably the federation president, but no doctor, no trainer. I mean, you guys must have gotten, a little bit hurt. This is a very physical tournament.
Nobody.
But you said you got hurt in the first game.
Well, yeah.
No. At least a physio,
No, we had nobody. Bob Gelker and the late coach Bob Gelter and us. That was it.
So you played against Guatemala. What happened in that game? Because it looked like you guys had them on the ropes. Can you just talk about that? I can only see the match report, but you were there. It was 1-1 in the halftime.
Yeah, a lot of it I think had to do, I'm trying to remember exactly, but I know that, we had some good shots on goal. We were attacking well. I just don't remember exactly where something broke down, where they took over. Like I said, I remember we played well. Part of it was, I think, the crowd. It was a huge. I mean, stadium was packed, and that's like the 12th player. You know what I mean? It impacts you, I guess. Probably have to ask in 2 weeks. O'Connell, what happened? Why you let that go?
I think it's amazing though that like you were saying earlier. How are you going to recognize these guys? Some of them you haven't seen in over 60 years.
Yeah, I was joking with them. I said, listen, when we get together at Wally's house, everybody have a name tag.
It's going to be amazing seeing all your old teammates again, and some of the reminiscence is going to be absolutely amazing, and I'm delighted that you're still going to get the chance to be able to do it, because like we've said, it's such an iconic tournament. The fact that it's taken this long for a reunion to happen, is just absolutely amazing. One thing that I did want to ask, obviously you've said there that your soccer career was unfortunately ended. Did you choose to go into coaching from there, or did you just get the head down and move into another career path?
I got a USSFA coaching license B. I got a B license. I was assistant coach for 3 years at the University of New Haven with Joe Macknick. You may have heard of Dr. Joe. I know Joe for a long time. So he was coaching at University of New Haven, and I was doing my master's at Southern Connecticut. I was his assistant coach. But I also was involved heavily in volleyball as a player and as a coach. I actually went on further in coaching volleyball than soccer. I took Rutgers Newark to the NCAA finals, and we were in NCAA finals twice, ended up third place. And then I coached also in high school for 2 years, Clifton High School. And then after that, I said, I have to try to earn some money or get a job, get a real job. I was actually hoping, I was really hoping to get a coaching job. There were a couple of jobs open, like there was Mitchell Junior College was an opening. I remember, didn't get that. And then after Clifton High School, I said, you know what, let me see what's available in the business world. And from there, I just took off, went to work. There's a company called Herman Miller, one of these large furniture manufacturers, Herman Miller and Knoll. And then from there, I went to work at a bank. I stayed there for like 20 years. And then after they got bought out, then I went to work in a couple of consulting firms. And then after that, retired. So I've been retired now for about 15 years.
You got to be really excited to seeing these guys once again. I mean, and rekindle all that information.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It'll really be interesting. We're going to take some photographs. I'm going to try to see if we could line up the same we have in the starting lineup picture against Jamaica, then and now.
How many do you expect to be there? I mean,
Well, there's going to be the six guys from St. Louis and myself. Roman Kuch said he can't make it. He teaches now at the Yale. He's a professor at Yale, but he's doing some big house renovations, so he won't be able to make it. And everybody else, all the Pittsburgh guys, the Philadelphia guys, Migliori, San Francisco guy, and Baltimore guys, can't track them down. I don't even know if they're alive.
It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate, and this is one of the big things about football research, particularly as we've found with CONCACAF, but also other nations as well. Some Scottish teams it applies to. These guys made memories with each other, they made shared experiences with each other and for the supporters, but they're almost lost to history. Like you said, Alex, you don't even know if they're still living or not, and the fact that we can't track them down to get those accounts of these moments is a huge loss. But I think, the reunion that you're going to is one step in making amends to that and actually getting some of this information. I really, really hope that you can recreate that lineup as much as possible with who you've got there. But it's good that you're going to meet up with the guys. I mean, I suppose, from what you can remember and from what you think now, how impactful and how influential was playing in that tournament for you and the rest of the guys in terms of your careers, but also just as people, the experiences you had? What was the lasting effect that it had on you and the people that you played with?
Well, I think what stood out immediately was the fact that you're representing the United States. You weren't just playing for your local team. You were representing the United States. And all these people coming up to you, asking for an autograph, and, Selección Nacional, Estados Unidos, Nombre 11, you know. That was really unbelievable. And then, that you got to meet these people you'd go to receptions. And so it was more than just playing a game with some team.
what about hearing the national anthem in another country?
Well, that's, that sends chills down your spine. You're like, wow. It's a big thing, and when you come back, people say, oh, you played there, oh, you played for a national team, oh, you did this, you did that, so that was really cool. And like I said, college scholarships, I mean, I'm sure everyone on that team was offered numerous college scholarships. I mean, I know that I was, and so that was a big impact. And always, afterwards, people saying, "Oh, you played on this team, on a national team," and that was the thing, was that it was the first. And then it really, after a number of years, it bothered me that you couldn't find anything about it. Even you contact U.S. Soccer, and they didn't have anything on it. I said, well, how could you not have information about this team?
I like to add on that, having worked at U.S. Soccer myself. We're going back late 1990s, 1999. Okay, I'm going into the U.S. Soccer for the first time. I'm there on a contract. I was there for 4 years. And I'm going in, I'm looking at their media guide. I mean, I have to admit, the U.S. was one of the first few teams in the CONCACAF region that actually put out something on a year-round basis as a form of a media guide, a publication. Okay, and then if you're looking through it, obviously is always the most updated information. But when you go into the youth competition ones, I mean, I was amazed. Yes, the only thing they had is obviously the records of the teams that competed in certain years. So I decided to go into their cabinets where they had each files on each of the national teams. Most of it is, handwritten. Very few were photos. So it was the only type of archives specifically for that team. And when I'm looking through it, the only thing I found was just a sheet with the scores of all the games. Nothing more details, not, on the match report. So this, why I'm saying this, because I want to give the opportunity to the person that put me in contact with Alex. And that was obviously one of our, he's a former board member, but now he's just a member of ANCCIF, but he's also one of the founding members. His name is Eric Lugo from Mexico. So he was the one that's doing the research on all the men's national teams for ANCCIF. And the youth tournament in Guatemala being one of them was in contact with Alex. And he was able to provide him as much information because Eric is just doing just a recap of all the statistical part, like all the match reports, all the rosters, etc. And I know Alex has been very helpful in that. So I do have to give credit where credit's due. Eric Lugo has done an excellent job to be able to put me in contact with Alex for this opportunity. It's a lot more detailed because I know Alex, not just Alex, but also the players that competed on that team and any other team from any other national association will have some sort of archives, will have some historical content. And it's great that to have this opportunity. But again, if you have more of this, then you will have more opportunity to have more of these former players to show and tell their stories, because that's what it's all about.
Exactly, and that's what football heritage is about as well. It's obviously, we're, in terms of the scope of what we do at football heritage, it's quite wide ranging, and obviously history is a big part of it. The Venn diagram between history and heritage, there's obviously a lot of overlap, but they are two distinctly different things. And I'm quite big on making sure that people know that heritage is modern as well, don't get me wrong. But a huge part of heritage that I always try and mention is obviously archiving. And with archiving comes discovery. And I'm always very careful when we're talking about the first team to do it. It's like, well, as we know it at the moment, yes. But the idea is that by furthering research, we might find out another club that's done it or another team that's done a specific thing. I'm not meaning specifically the tournament in Guatemala, but I'm just meaning as a general kind of example. This is why archiving is important, because if you don't archive, then you lose. That's just how it goes. You lose some vital information, you lose vital stories, you lose vital people, and this is what we're trying to, I suppose, raise a bit of awareness of and get people to come on and do, like Alex has kindly done today by telling us his story and his life in soccer, which has been absolutely tremendous.
I just hope that somehow this gets to U.S. soccer in Texas. I guess that's where they're headquartered now.
Oh, the Soccer Hall of Fame.
That it gets there and somebody puts this in its proper perspective and says, yeah, here we have all these U19, U17s, U20s. And here is the team that's the very first one that went there on a shoestring. You know what I mean? I just want it properly, historically, the record be set straight and that we're put in where we belong. We're, okay, these were the first guys that went there.
It's not too much to ask.
Yeah, so when somebody looks it up, they'll say, well, look up U.S. soccer on 1964. Well, what happened? Nothing. What do you mean nothing? Something happened.
I mean, it gets to the point, I'm not going to speak on behalf of U.S. soccer, as Rory knows, and I've had this conversation with Alex off the record as well, but I'll freely say it right now, is that they do have the Soccer Hall of Fame, but unfortunately, and it's no secret, there's a whole lot of archives, boxes of, memorabilias, what have you. They have it somewhere in a storage area in North Carolina. I don't know where it is specifically. I wish I did. But everything is in there. And that's everything that used to be in the old Soccer Hall of Fame, which was in Oneonta, Alex. So everything has been brought down. So not everything is at the location right now in Frisco. So sadly, someone has to go in there, or somebody has to go in there and start looking, what can we put out there? What is needed? But sadly, I'm not saying that they may not have that information. You'd be surprised how much stuff could be in there. But, again, I'm not defending it. But someone from the Hall of Fame needs to go in there or send some folks, because, you have stories like yourself and others in other national teams that they want to tell their story, but they can't go to the Hall of Fame to see it.
There needs to be a more central point, I suppose, and this is part of the issue with, I think it's part of the issue with football historical research in general. Like ANCCIF is a fantastic organisation because it provides people with a central resource that they can go to access these kinds of records. But I would say organisations like that are very far between at that kind of level. Yes, like you have them at club level. Like, we have a heritage trust or heritage society for every single football club in Scotland. And I'm going, down to like tier 7 as a club that has a museum and stuff. But that's at club level. You go to national level and we don't have the complete picture of Scottish football that people can go and like access and see somewhere. So there is also this kind of issue of accessibility as well. And I think as football historians and heritage experts, we need to take a little bit more of a look about how we can work collaboratively with other clubs, but also on a national level to try and piece together the different stories of football in our respective nations, because I think it's important that conversations like this one have happened, Alex. I think it's important that people like yourself get to tell their stories and get a platform to do it, because at the end of the day, this is what discovery and this is what football and soccer heritage is all about.
Yeah, what's interesting is, I'm in about 4 Hall of Fames, and, afterwards people say, oh, and you played for this national team then, huh? And they go to the website, I don't see anything there. So they're like saying, well, did you really? And I go, no, really. It's like you got to carry around a picture of the diplomas.
Seriously, it's such a sad story, Rory, because to elaborate more on what Alex mentioned, is that's just an example. I mean, you'd be surprised how media outlets, they try to find anything on certain games or certain tournaments or certain competition, but they'll pick up the phone and just call their folks at the U.S. Soccer Federation. Listen, I can't find anything on your website. Do you have anything? So then you have to go in and look at the archives of what you can send, because what other game notes they might need. How many times the youth team has competed in certain competitions? When was it actually a qualifier for a FIFA event? All those things, that's when, and as I explained to Alex during my time at CONCACAF, I was able to try to build an historical database there. Now, where is it now since I left 2013? I don't know. Okay. All I know is that I tried to, because I was always getting calls as the media officer. I need some more information on the Gold Cup. What happened previous Gold Cups? I mean, we tried to put every Gold Cup tournament in that so that the website had all that information, because people want to know. People want to know who scored what goal. And even in the youth competitions, wanted to know how many teams competed in certain tournaments, who was the first goal. And luckily today in this podcast, we have a former member of the first U.S. team there, and he has given us a lot of stories from that event.
Yeah, 100%. It's important that they're recorded as well. But I mean, Alex, just before we begin to wrap things up, how important was that tournament in Guatemala to yourself, to your teammates, but to US soccer as a whole? But I suppose mainly just from your personal perspective, your personal heritage within the game, how important is Guatemala 1964 as that kind of origin point for what you would go on to do in soccer?
For me personally, it was like the first pinnacle of wanting to achieve something, to represent your country. I mean, I remember my father writing a note to the principal of my high school that, this is a great honor, for my son to represent the United States. So for me, it was a really, really important, and it always will be, a very important point, that I can always look back at. As far as what it influenced in terms of the rest of my career, it gave me another sort of star on my resume. You know what I mean? Going and try out for a team or something, somebody said, well, he played for this team.
He represented the United States at international level.
He wasn't just a fly-by-night guy, so it added a lot of importance and prestige going forward. As far as how it impacted in U.S. soccer, unfortunately, zero.
As we found out, yeah.
Unfortunately, zero. I mean, as far as on the big stage, even during, tryouts and so forth for Pan Am team, Olympic team, etc. Yeah, some of the players knew this. Oh, yeah, he played for this team. Yeah, he went to Guatemala, But as far as like coaches and the U.S. Soccer Federation as a whole, for example, I don't even know after 64 if there were any other teams that went in CONCACAF from U.S. What happened after 64? 65, 66, 67, 68? Ditto, zero.
There was just no lack of communication, lack of follow-up. Just, yeah, I'm with you.
It was just like no follow-up. I mean, Bob Gelker wrote an article that McSkimming wrote saying, listen, you have to create some sort of system here to continue growth so players go. I mean, I was reading today about a player. Oh, he went through the U system and now he's going to be signed by so-and-so. That didn't happen 50, 60 years ago. There was no system to go through. It just disappeared. So to answer your question, yeah, zero. It had no real impact on the national or the U.S. soccer. It wasn't promoted. It was not like we got a ticker tape parade when we got back. St. Louis, yeah, Dent McSkimming wrote articles every day. In the Staatsherald in New York, yeah, the German papers wrote, and the Ukrainian papers wrote a big article, and pictures and everything else. But from the U.S. soccer, it just kind of like disappeared. It was really weird.
Well, to answering your question there, Alex, it looks like it took another 10 years before another U.S. team competed. Because according to my archives, 1974, the tournament in Canada. It was
Wow.
still an under-19 tournament, and it's very sad. That was very sad.
Yeah, because I would have thought if it was under 19, man, they picked me again in 2 years. Nothing happened. Never got a phone call.
Wow.
True.
So yeah, it's sad. I mean, because you went off to college, and next thing was trying to win national championships there. But that's about it. Nothing on the other levels, unfortunately.
I mean, hopefully this podcast goes some way into helping you at least record, you being an internationally capped footballer. Like, let's address it for what it is. There's an entire squad of people who haven't been recognised as representing the United States and being the first team to play at that tournament at that level. It's something that needs to be spoken. I mean, it was around this time last year actually we released an episode on the first Matildas team, which is a kind of semi-similar situation. It was the very first team the very first women's football team from Australia that played in a tournament, but effectively the first Matildas team weren't given international caps because they were judged to be a representative team and not a national team because all of the players came from one club. So there's a lot of politics and debate surrounding that, obviously. But if we look at this in the same kind of context, it is what it is. This is why stories like these are important. It's why bringing it to the attention of the relevant associations, the relevant media outlets is important as well. And yeah, I mean, we obviously wish you best of luck on your mission, Alex, to make more people aware of this. And we can only hope that the story grows and grows and more people start researching the history of this to start piecing it together, because it would be a real shame for it just to all become lost over time,
Yeah, the guys told me, they said that they're looking forward to listening to this and watching this podcast when I get to St. Louis. So I said, I'll make sure I mention them.
That's good to know. I appreciate that. Guys, thank you very much for coming on to speak with us. This has been absolutely brilliant. We'd be delighted to have you guys back on anytime. Alex, I am begging you to send me those photographs because they're absolutely incredible. They're really, really good quality. So you must send them over so that I can show them to our followers on social media.
I'll send you as much as I can.
Perfect. Good man. Of course, thank you very much to all of our listeners who tuned in for this episode once again. If there's anything that you want us to cover, if you have any questions about this recording, then just reach out to us on X. That's @_footballheritage. Or you can email us as well at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. Please also leave us a review if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, because it does wonders for pushing us in front of new listeners. In this case, we'll do wonders for pushing Alex's story in front of new people as well. That's it from us this week. For now, Stephen, say goodbye.
Good night. Thank you once again to have me. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure having you on, mate. Alex, say goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate the time.
Good. I appreciate you coming on as well. It's good night for me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.